Hey class, Paul here. I want to talk about the risk measurement and resilience strategies for this week's discussion. I look forward to it. It's one of the near and dear topics for me, being a supply chain slash information systems professional, both on the operations side all the way to the technology side. It's something that is very important. I feel that it is one of the big things that, or reoccurring themes that will really come out of the 21st century is building the resilience and risk measurement, not just organizationally, but each individual as a person, building out a framework to deal and build the resiliency within themselves, because we are going through a massive disruptive period, not only economically, societally, and technologically, but you have conspiring events that are due to changes in climate, economic changes, demographic changes globally, as well as interdependencies on food and agriculture and energy. And you have a lot of nations that are dying. For example, Russia is in its final years of its existence as we know Russia today, just because you have the Russian ethnicity gradually waning, and you have the different populations that make up the Russian Federation of different ethnicities growing in population, and you're going to have what we have seen through the history of human or the human experience is these battles and changes as demographics change, as food chains change, as the ability to adapt to different environments changes for different peoples. You see this in biology in animals as the population overgrows and then there isn't enough food and the population dies off. It is a similar tone to the actual human experience, but it's more self-imposed versus an actual ecosystem problem. And so some of this, for a human perspective, or most of this is driven by technological adaptability, education, as well as economic ability. So, for example, you look at in Africa, due to the Ukraine war and what's going on in the war with Iran, but also how climate is changing, it's much harder now to grow things. And even though the development of genetically modified seeds that have allowed for African countries in very arid areas to grow things requires massive infrastructure investment that these nations don't have, especially nations that have been going into gradual civil war to try to fight for these resources within themselves or amongst themselves. So you have these challenges happening, and the United States is very blessed geographically. We have a lot of arable land. We can produce a lot of food. We overproduce. We actually pay lots and lots of farmers not to grow things. We have a wonderful waterway system that moves transportation and goods around. We have a great rail system. We have a massive moat of two oceans, and we have two friendly nations, very friendly nations on our border. So we have a lot of things going for us. Plus, we have a lot of energy. We have a lot of minerals. We have a lot of infrastructure, etc. And so we're well endowed to be able to weather a lot of the different storms. But still, regardless, we're interconnected through the internet, so cyber attacks can happen. We've had our southern border open, and you had not only people seeking refuge in the United States, but you had a lot of nefarious actors also trying to penetrate, because we have a lot of folks that don't like us for whatever reason, and reading between the lines. But there's these challenges that can come from that: terrorism, natural disaster. You can pick your situation, and as we're going through this global disruption, there's going to be a lot of challenges. The U.S. will benefit tremendously from it and will come out on top just because of our geography by itself and our ability to weather different types of situations, for all the grief that Americans get for being, lax and relaxed and not really, focused on developing themselves on a continuous basis. When the time comes, we're very good at adapting and going to the forefront of success. We've built that resilience as a culture, nationally, etc. So we have a lot of advantages as a nation. Plus, we're a melting pot. So you have a lot of different views and point of views that creates this unique sense of strength within our nation. And it is really important to build on that resilience that we've built up over time. And as these different threats and scenarios come to be. And so companies will begin to focus on localization of their supply chains and building that out and being able to service their local markets, because you don't want to have a supply chain that is sprawling in an environment where there's continuous change, wars, etc. That it becomes very problematic at best, and it's not very cost effective. In the ideal world, you can have a globalized or a mixed hybrid supply chain where it's partially globalized, or it could be globalized and localized at the same time. But it's a challenge when you have rapid changes and you have countries beginning to now fight for resources. So going forward, resilience becomes one of those big components, and being able to measure what threats are present now and how can you prepare for future threats in the future is very important. So when you're measuring risk, you want to identify key factors in vulnerability, risk assessment, threat identification, asset evaluation, weakness analysis, likelihood of estimation, and impact potential. So each one of those things is a conversation that you want to have. One example is in the pharmaceutical company that I used to work with, we had a very global-based supply chain. For example, we would pick up plasma at one of our centers. There'd be like a truck that picks up from each center X amount of boxes, then it would be delivered to a warehouse in Louisville, then it would be shipped to California to be made into several different products, and then filled maybe in a place in Illinois, then sent on to Europe to be filled, or maybe even to Georgia. There was a lot of different movements, and one of the problems that the company was trying to save on is, instead of air freighting everything in 48 hours, creating a new SOP that will allow us to use for the raw materials ocean-based freight. Now, from a perspective in today's world, due to the shifting nature of geopolitical climates, moving things through the sea might not be a smart idea, because literally, if you were to sink or lose a container that was being shipped by us, would be worth at least $50 million of raw material. It's not a smart way to move things. It's better to move at the higher cost. So let's say your containerized shipment costs $15,000 and your air freight costs you about $60,000, $80,000, depending on the type of storage containers you use that chill the raw material to 2 to 8 Celsius. By spending that $100,000, it's a rounding error when it comes to the 50 million. So from a business perspective, you have to look at what makes sense. And I think a lot of organizations, not only the executive leadership, but investors and board of directors have to really have a wide open eye and understanding that, like, yes, you might be investing in this company and they are putting out good numbers, but are they susceptible to a massive risk in their supply chain if something goes wrong? A great example of that is with the Chinese supply chain. What happened during the pandemic? You spent 30 years and you made considerable savings over 30 years, but were wiped out within a year during the pandemic because your entire supply chain ground to a halt. And if you think about it, if it's one event that will destroy your entire capability to function as a company, that's something that you might not want to do. Seriously, you might not want to do. And from investors to board of directors to executives, that conversation needs to be had. It's not just about saving money on people, because their business does not just include people. People are one of the most important tools in the process. It's how you integrate your technology. It's how you integrate your processes. It's how you integrate your product development, how you integrate your servicing of your customer, etc. It's all about that. It's an ecosystem within itself. And that is very important, because if you don't deal with a lot of the risks, let's say you are very container focused when shipping. And for example, a lot of major retailers have rented their own cargo ships. Imagine, the Chinese or somebody that owns a private diesel electric sub and all of a sudden sinks your entire ship. Boy, that was a really smart investment to have your supply chain to be so global now, is it? It's not. So if you localize it, you're insulated. Now, it doesn't mean that you're completely isolated from anything happening. You can have natural disasters. So how you plan for that? You're not going to locate your manufacturing hub facility in a major earthquake-prone state. That just doesn't make any sense. So there's things that you have to think about and understand and have a scoring of the likelihood of an impact. And this changes over time as well. As threats are eliminated, new threats come about. There's several risk assessment methods. There's a lot of different internal methods that companies have. I mean, there's a mention of the Carver methodology as well. Risk assessment and audits, hazard identification. So if you don't maintain your equipment and it has the potential for hazardous waste, that's a huge hazard. For example, if you run nuclear power plants and if you don't maintain them, well, a Chernobyl-like event is a problem. And then doing a lot of different scenario analysis. Royal Dutch Shell was very famous in their strategic thinking of doing scenario analysis. And being able to think through, okay, if this happens, what are we going to do? What is our plan? And then periodically going over those plans and having everybody ready. And the real key in the future is building that culture mindset, not only in your employees, but as individuals as well, so that we can go from not only company to company, but our day-to-day life is building that resilience. Whatever comes our way, we can adapt and overcome. Because with all the disruption, despite all the other threats, you have job disruption, you have technological disruption, you have all these things. I call them asymmetrical chaos. And it is a continuous chaos that requires a mindset that is able to adapt and overcome regardless of the situation. And so, not only from the corporate level, but the individual level, how do you continuously prepare for this type of disruption? 75% of organizations utilize a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods to effectively assess vulnerabilities. You're using different methods that, best you can. Some companies do it more than others. If you have a very susceptible supply chain that can create a lot of damage, it's prudent to do a risk assessment. In order to create risk reduction, it's about strengthening physical security, enhancing cyber defenses, and developing training programs. It's really establishing emergency procedures and thinking through the different challenges that might come your way. Strengthening defenses, robust security structure, and protecting against cyber security threats or whatever will impact your business or organization. And then risk treatment strategies overview. You have avoidance, reduction, and transfer, as well as acceptance, acknowledging that you can't foresee and take care of every single threat that comes your way. A great example in the Iran war, there are, for example, most of the air defenses that the Iranians had for long-range and medium-range missiles have been taken out. But that doesn't mean there are short-range Frankenstein systems that exist out there that cannot take pop shots. The entire threat is not completely eliminated. That's why you had the shoot down of the F-15. That's why you had the shot at the F-35 and the F-18 as well. And also when you're dealing with an air campaign, you have a situation that creates risk around moving aircraft and refueling. A great example is the E-3 Sentry that was blown up in Saudi Arabia, and the damage to the KC-135s in that facility. So from a great example of that is being able to deal with those threats and being able to account for it. You know that there are going to be threats that you can't completely control, and you have to either accept it, transfer the risk, and then reduce it or completely avoid it. And so from a business perspective, there are all kinds of risks. There's regulatory risks, there's economic risks, etc. So you have to be continuously preparing for those different events. You also have, risk models. You have qualitative versus quantitative, all hazards approach, threat-based models, and business impacts analysis. So you're looking, if a truly robust risk situation is being taken care of, you're looking at different components and how you can handle those in different situations. And then selecting the right models based on the industry. Like, for example, in pharmaceuticals is our ability to produce medicine and be able to serve patients. Because if you can't do that, you're not really in business, and you can pretty much lose everything overnight if you don't plan for it. You have mandated models. You have certain industries, for example, oil and gas, that you have to deal with when you're not only dealing with overseas investments, but also localized ones. Because, like, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, you have the oil platforms and the gas platforms. They deal with hurricanes. So how are you going to deal with that? Do you have the safety protocols in place? Did you build the oil platforms to that specific environment? Like, a really good example of a mischaracterization, ironically, I just talked about Royal Dutch Shell doing scenario analysis. When Royal Dutch Shell was building their big project in Russia called Sakhalin-1, they estimated that the actual project cost would be $7 billion. And this was in the late 90s, 2000s. But as the project went on, because it's a very hostile, difficult Siberian Arctic environment on the east coast near Vladivostok, not too far from Japan, it's a very inhospitable, cold place, and it's on water as well. So as challenges started coming to the project, it went from $7 billion to $14 billion, eventually $21 billion, and then Shell got kicked out of the project by the Russians and eventually was taken over by ExxonMobil, a consortium led by ExxonMobil, a Japanese consortium, and a couple other companies, including the state gas company of Russia. And so the project eventually became a success, and they started on Sakhalin-2 and Sakhalin-3. Sakhalin-2 came on production, but not fully due to the Ukraine and Russian war. But you can see that when there's technical complexities and hostile environments, there is a lot of risk to think about. And I'm not even talking about the other, state-on-state, wars and terrorist attacks and cybersecurity, etc. So you want to sit there and build that, multi-scenario resilience into the plan. Now, resilience in action is just basically being able to absorb shocks, adapt to changing environments, and recover from disruption. That's the biggest thing. If you can recover really quickly, let's say, you have this, big earthquake and it takes out a lot of your power plants, you can rebuild those quickly. That's what resilience is. I liked a phrase that I had read from the book Freedom Forge, that they would describe Henry Kaiser, that built the Liberty ship, the Liberty ships during World War II. I can build it again, even though I haven't built it before. That kind of mentality will allow you to build complex things after such events. And you want to look at your cost benefit. Obviously, everything comes down to cost. So you want to know what's your highest threat now, and then what's your lowest threat, and have a continuous realigning of those threats. And then you can experience 65% ROI if you have an average investment when implementing effective risk management. So, you're basically avoiding silly mistakes that can lead to big things. A silly thing that led, or many silly things that led to a big disaster is the Deepwater Horizon project. They didn't see that oil platform build the way it should have been built, and that cost tens of billions of dollars in damage to the environment, to BP, etc. So you don't want to sit there and shortcut things. You want to sit there and build in that resilience, that because no matter what, you'll be able to effectively deal with them. Thanks, guys. Took a little bit longer than normal, but there's a lot to talk through on the resilience side.